When I was celebrating my birthday last weekend, my friend Elizabeth and I decided to go out and grab a bite and then go to the movies and see what was playing. I was unaware that the 25th anniversary of Stephen Sommers' The Mummy had just recently happened, and they were having a showing at the local AMC. Elizabeth had never seen The Mummy before, and it was one of my most viewed films of all time growing up, so it was very exciting to get to see the movie, not only with a friend who had never seen it before, but also to see it for the first time on the big screen, and not just on my home media like I'd seen it growing up. One of the reasons that I think The Mummy has such a large cult following is because it's one of those films from a different era. Like, this movie is able to combine elements from films decades before it was ever made and also make it a very modern 1990s action thriller film, sort of existing in this subgenre of what I like to call late 90s expedition films, where characters would go searching for a treasure and a ragtag group of heroes would have to defeat an ancient evil and save the world. It's kind of hard to believe this movie is 25 years old, and I thought I would take some time in a video to talk about kind of how much I love it and some memories that I have growing up watching it. This was directed by Stephen Sommers, who before this had done Deep Rising, and it stars, of course, good old, legendary, iconic Brendan Fraser. My good friend, Brendan Fraser, he's a good buddy of mine. What's funny is we did meet at a convention, and it was during the era where COVID was kind of winding down, but because of that, they still had like a plexiglass screen in between the two of us. He was very nice. It was a very brief meeting, but what's funny is I have a picture on my wall over here of us meeting, and because of the plexiglass, it looks like I photoshopped myself badly into a picture. But no, I did actually meet Brendan Fraser. It was very cool. It was a very big, full circle thing from my childhood. We're kind of in the midst of a Brendan Fraser renaissance right now. He just won his Oscar last year for The Whale, and he also had an appearance in Killers of the Flower Moon, which is nominated for Best Picture. A lot of people are hoping for another Mummy movie, but I'm personally not. I don't think it needs a sequel. I'd like to see him in more mainstream films and not just in sequels to things he did years ago. And I think with the way sequels are coming out nowadays, I think most people would probably agree with me there. The movie, of course, is a remake of the 1932 Universal horror film The Mummy, directed by Karl Freund and starring Boris Karloff and Zita Johann. I am a massive nerd and fan of the Universal monster films from the 1930s and 40s, so much so that I'm probably going to do a very long video about them in the future, so I'm going to save a lot of my talk for The Mummy for that. The Mummy is unique in that it is one of the few Universal monster films that's not based off of a classic piece of literature like Frankenstein, Dracula, The Phantom of the Opera. This was an original idea inspired by the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb that actually happened around that time. This is technically the second remake of The Mummy, although the remake from Hammer in the 1950s starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee is a very loose remake. It's more based on the Mummy sequels, which are also very loose sequels. Only the original Mummy is about Imhotep, which is the Mummy in the 1999 remake. The Mummy sequels followed a different mummy named Karis, played by Lon Chaney Jr., and the Hammer remake is more in the spirit of those films. This film actually borrowed a lot from not only the original Boris Karloff film with the same mummy, Imhotep, and the same sort of structure, like the mummy's goal is to revive his dead lover, but also borrowed from the sequels in that they're much more action-adventure oriented and they have a lot more comedy. This is a very funny movie at times. As a matter of fact, when we were seeing this in the theater, my friend who'd never seen it before and myself who'd seen it several times were just cracking up at the very good comedic relief in this film that would be very annoying in any other kind of movie release now, but it worked here because it knew when to be funny. It was able to balance the tone of horror, thriller, and action-adventure as well as comedy. One of the things that I love about this movie, going back and watching it so many years later, is the way that it handles the supernatural punishments for the characters that disturb the tomb of Imhotep and Hamunaptra. In a way, this is kind of a throwback to 80s horror films and 80s slashers specifically, where the characters that are getting killed are characters you kind of want to see killed because they're doing things for their own selfish reasons. Like, the Americans in this film are all portrayed as these stereotypical Southerners with single-action revolvers, and they're very boisterous and drunk, and they're gambling all their money and don't really care for one another, kind of shoving each other out of the way in intense sequences. These are the characters that steal from the chest and steal the jars, which Imhotep is trying to retrieve and is bound by curse to do so and suck their life force to regain his regenerated physical form. The horror in these sequences is really well done. I remember as a kid not being necessarily scared of this movie, but feeling very tensed up when watching some of these sequences. I remember the scene with the guy who has the Velma weakness where he drops his glasses and they get crushed and he can't find his way without his glasses, and being stuck in this dark, blurry hallway, not able to see anything. They don't show the mummy yet, they just have this intense string music playing and you kind of see a out of focus figure before he's killed. Or he's not actually killed, his eyes and tongue are ripped out, which was very freaky as a kid. The three main characters of the movie are Evie, played by Rachel Weisz, her brother Jonathan, and of course, Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell. Every character in this movie is kind of a classic archetype of some kind. Rick O'Connell is the Errol Flynn-style heroic adventurer that knows his way around all kinds of guns. I mean, this guy shoots literally anything that moves in this movie, even a bug at one point, which is really funny. This is also to praise Brendan Fraser's performance. He doesn't take himself too seriously. This is a very tongue-in-cheek performance, as well as it is a tongue-in-cheek movie at times. The opening is very serious and intense, yet a lot of the action is very lighthearted and comical, and I think that works very well for the kind of adventure that you want to go on. Rachel Weisz's character, Evie, is the bookworm, librarian, and historian, very into Egypt, and everybody kind of doubts her. I think the other crew at one point even says, like, oh, she's a woman, what does she know? But she actually knows more than most characters, but at the same time, she also falls prey to the curiosity that ends up almost getting her killed. She's the one that reads from the Book of the Dead that awakens Imhotep later in the story. Her brother Jonathan is hilarious. He's this kind of get-rich-quick kind of guy, really wants to discover the treasure. That's the most important thing to him, where she's into it more for the historical aspect of it. These characters are just really easy to like, and they all play off each other very well. There's a very natural chemistry between the three main characters, and eventually the character who is part of this organization called the Magi, trying to protect Hamunaptra and keep Imhotep interred there, played by Oded Fehr, is the character named Ardeth Bey, and he naturally joins them and is a very good fit for that trio of characters, and he actually gets more screen time in the sequel. Fun fact, Ardeth Bey is the name of this character and is the name that Imhotep takes in the 1930s film when he takes on human form. As much as I remember a lot of this movie from when I was a child, what I remember the most is owning it on DVD, and as a kid, I was a bonus feature kid. I wanted to watch all the special features, all the deleted scenes, all the behind the scenes stuff as a kid, and this movie had some of the best special features. If I can find some on YouTube, I'll put clips here, but they went through the whole process of the film, why Stephen Sommers wanted to make it, his main goals with wanting to tell this story and update it for a modern audience, the concept art and the motion capture, the special effects, the CG, everything that went into making the film, and I think that passion comes across in the final product. One of my favorite things about this movie is the set design. It's absolutely gorgeous. The production design is incredible. I love Hamunaptra in the flashbacks. I love it in the modern day where it's kind of covered in sand and buried underneath all this sand after hundreds and thousands of years. I love going into tombs and crypts and treasure rooms. There's just something about seeing a real physical set, which you know nowadays they would have sort of built but extended with CG. You know, this is just a real massive set that they really built with a big budget, and that creates a tangibility to the goals of the characters. We want to see them earn this treasure. We want to see them unearth this sarcophagus and go on this adventure. I was talking about this with my brother when we rewatched it before I filmed this video. This movie has some of the most iconic props that I've seen in any movie. Like, I want to own replicas or original copies of some of the props that were used in this movie. It would be so cool to have the little key that they open up and then the Book of the Dead. Going back to some of the behind the scenes stuff, I really appreciate the work that they were able to do and the ambition that they had in wanting to push forward the special effects for the era. Like, this is right off the heels of Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park with its CGI, and a lot of this holds up really well. Even seeing it on a big screen, there weren't a lot of issues. Some of it was dated, but for the most part, it holds up very, very well. Like, there's a scene towards the end of the film where Rick runs in and saves Evie and fights all these mummies surrounding her with a sword, and those two are the only real elements in that scene. Everything else is CGI in terms of the enemies that he's fighting, and that's a very ambitious shot to pull off for the 90s. The motion tracking had to be on point, the dust simulations, the characters having their bodies fall apart. It had to look really good, and it still does look good. In motion, it looks fantastic. And I think the reason why some of the special effects still hold up is that there's always a practical element anchoring them to reality. Like, when you first see these characters that they're fighting, they are practical, they're people in makeup, and they have them in CG when they're doing something impossible, like falling apart or climbing on a wall, or having their jaws stretched to ridiculous lengths. That's when you use CGI properly, and I think that's what we're missing nowadays, is that practical element to cut back to remind us that there is a real presence here, and that sort of sells our brain on the illusion that CG is able to create. I I want to give props to Arnold Vosloo, the guy that plays Imhotep in this film. Had to learn ancient Egyptian for the role and speak it very well, and also just give off this really intimidating aura. I absolutely love whenever this character walks through a crowd full of people. You feel that sort of power and that intimidating, like, this is the guy that could destroy the world. But they also managed to give this guy a really sympathetic backstory, which of course comes from the original 1930s film. That's one of the elements that they borrow. He truly did love the pharaoh's mistress, Anck-su-namun, and he's trying his best to bring her back, but of course there's an evil motive of taking over the world with all this power there to make him the bad guy, which is a perfect balance of serious and also Saturday morning cartoon villain at the same time. My favorite scene in the movie, without a doubt, is whenever the character of Benny, who's kind of the comedic relief sidekick villain in the movie, is running through the Egyptologist's house and trying to find his jar, and Rick, with near perfect precision, grabs this chair and just hurls it across the room and hits him flawlessly. That right there is what makes The Mummy work, is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's able to laugh at itself while also being a very genuinely intense, serious movie at times. Like, some of the concepts in this movie really freak me out. Like, I remember as a kid thinking that those bugs, the scarab beetles that crawl in your skin, were horrifying. I'll never forget the opening scene when they dump a barrel full of them onto Imhotep while he's still alive. That's horrific. And that's something that they also borrow from the original film. I remember the original Mummy being one of the first films to show somebody get impaled. This movie was also pushing its violence, but also keeping its PG-13 rating in a very clever way that I think is probably a direct reference to films from the 30s and 40s. The way that Anck-su-namun dies, and the way that one character is drained of all of his life force, the way that Anck-su-namun's mummy is killed again later in the film, are shot where you see a shadow of the characters getting stabbed on the wall. That's a very clever throwback to 30s and 40s films. I remember the House of Frankenstein film where Dr. Niemann, played by Boris Karloff, is killed by the Hunchback character in that film, and I remember that shot always sticking out to me where you see the shadow, and that leaves your mind to imagine what's actually happening here. I also love when they do it in the, I believe it's the Black Cat or the Raven with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, where Lugosi skins Karloff alive and they show the shadow. Again, it's horrifying to show something like that. There's something also about letting our minds imagine what that would feel like and what that would look like, and I think The Mummy does that very well. It's a perfect movie for its time, a late 90s action film, but it's also a perfect throwback to films of the decades that came before it. Not only is this a film that I enjoyed seeing sort of for my birthday weekend, but also Mother's Day is coming up this weekend, and this is one of my mom's favorite movies. She loves The Mummy, and also The Mummy Returns, which I think I'll probably touch on briefly here. The Mummy Returns is not a good movie. It's a bad movie. There's a lot of issues with this movie. I mean, they spend most of the film riding around in a hot air balloon. There is the CGI, the infamous CGI, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. There's a ton of issues with this movie, but for some reason I can't bring myself to hate it. It's like one of my top 5 guilty pleasures of all time. I think the ambition for this movie was a little too high, whereas the CG in the first film was used very well. The CG here is just not. It's very, very blatantly trying to cram as much as it can into one movie, and it just doesn't work for me. They don't have as much of the horror elements that I like from the first film, but I can't bring myself to dislike The Mummy Returns. I also have a lot of fond memories of the video game on the PS2 for The Mummy Returns, where you could play as either Rick or Imhotep, and of course, you gotta play as Imhotep. I mean, who wants to play as a regular guy when you can play as the immortal, blood-sucking mummy? I remember that's actually how you regain health in the game, is you use your powers to drain the life force of people. It's awesome. But yeah, I just wanted to give time on this channel for a little bit just to talk about The Mummy, since it was on my mind after seeing it as a really cool little birthday gift with my friend over the weekend. And of course, another sort of great gift, in addition to seeing The Mummy over the weekend, getting Rango to go over 100,000 views, even though it did get demonetized, but we're working on that. I also just passed 20,000 subscribers, and that's a huge deal. It really does blow my mind that, God, I remember when 1,000 people subscribed to this channel, and I had no idea that it was going to go any further than that, and it's gone way further than I ever imagined, and it looks like it's going to keep going if we keep making great videos, and I keep interacting with you guys in such a great way, and you, for whatever reason, enjoy what I have to say about things that I like. It's crazy. I wanted to bring to your attention that I did go and update my Patreon. It is now outfitted with new tiers. There are 4 tiers on there, $1 being the lowest tier. This helps me out in the event that, you know, one of my videos is demonetized for whatever reason. This is how you can support me. a $3 tier, which will give you access to my Discord server, as well as getting videos 24 hours early. The $5 tier includes everything in the $3, as well as access to a monthly live stream where we can just hang out and chat. Also, when you sign up for that one, you'll receive a special gift from me. And of course, the $10 tier, the most expensive tier, will give you access to all those things before, as well as a monthly commentary track that I'm going to be doing, where I'm going to watch any movie. Sometimes I'll take suggestions from you guys as well, and I'll just watch it, record a whole commentary track. You can download that. It's like watching a movie with me, my family, or my friends. You'll also get exclusive videos by joining the $10 tier. These videos will be behind the scenes, my setup, showing you my setup and my creative process. They'll also give you access to videos that I have to edit for YouTube, where like I can't show certain things on YouTube, I can't say certain things on YouTube. You'll get uncensored and unedited versions of those videos. Also, starting off with the $3 tier, there will be a list like this one showing off my patrons that donate to the channel. You'll have your name listed in the credits, and if you donate to the $10 tier, I'll actually read your name out loud at the end of videos. If you can't join the Patreon or anything like that, thank you so much anyway for just watching, liking, and subscribing, and doing all those things. Thank you for listening to me talk about The Mummy for a little bit, and all the other things that I talk about on this channel. Thank you for considering checking out the Patreon if you are. This video is a little more laid back than it normally would be because I'm actually working on a much longer and more edited video that's coming out soon. I can't wait for you to see that one. I'm pretty excited about the concept for that video. As always, thank you so much for watching my video. I will see you next time. Please check out the Patreon. Also, before I go, be sure and check out my Twitter, my Instagram. I have a TikTok. I post shorts here on YouTube as well. Check out my Letterboxd account if you want to see what I'm watching. Maybe it'll give you hints as to what I'm going to be talking about as well, if you can kind of figure that out. Anyway, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.